Okay, so we're still in the first blessing of the Shemoneh Esrei. Now, we mentioned yesterday, recalls the kindnesses of the patriarchs. Well, the first problem is, it recalls them. What does it mean to recall something? Usually it means I wasn't thinking about it. It was buried in my memory, but I wasn't thinking about it. And then I focused my attention on it, brought it to mind, as we say. Is that really an appropriate description of the Creator? Like something he has in mind, something he doesn't have in mind. You set an alarm, remember to send the email at 6 o'clock. Doesn't sound like an interesting, appropriate description of the Creator. The truth is that the word in Hebrew, zocher, doesn't, its meaning isn't limited to what we would call remembering. And the proof of it is in the second chapter of the book of Esther. There, the book says that, in the first chapter, you know that there was a celebration and the queen rebelled against the king, and the king at least had the queen deposed. Thank you very much. Had the queen deposed. The oral tradition says she died also, but at least she was removed from her position. Thank you very much. She was removed from her position. And at the beginning of the second chapter in the book of Esther, it says that Ahasuerus, the king, remembered Vashti and remembered what had been decreed against her, and then went on to take certain measures. Now, how are we supposed to read, this is the same word, lizkor, how are we supposed to read that? You can imagine Ahasuerus wandering around the palace. Where's Vashti? I bet she's in Acapulco running up the credit cards. Oh no, I forgot. 4 months ago, we had a depose. Probably not, right? Probably didn't forget that. Didn't have to figure it out, scratch his memory to see where she might be. So lizkor doesn't have to mean remembering something that you otherwise forgot or otherwise lost track of. I'm following the Ramchal now. I think a good description of lizkor is to make a present decision on the basis of a past fact. That past fact now becomes a reason for deciding what you decide now. Not that you forgot about it, but not all things of the past are relevant to all present decisions. This now became relevant because he hasn't got a queen, and the realm needs a king and a queen, so that triggers the process of his searching for a new queen. So when we say that God, so to speak, remembers, present tense, that means he's always remembering the loving kindnesses of the fathers. That means that those loving kindnesses of the fathers are always relevant to the decisions that he makes. They built the foundation of the world, and although other things are also relevant, and other things that are relevant change, but this is a constant theme. And he's always remembering that. Now, what are the loving kindnesses of the fathers? So, you first think, that's how they treated the people. Abraham was famous for that. Not only did Abraham take in the 3 travelers, as everyone knows, but, although it's written in the text, people aren't as aware of it, when God tells Abraham that I've heard a terrible report about Sodom, and if the report is true, the place is going to be destroyed, Abraham enters into a whole long defense. First of all, if there are righteous people there, then you can't destroy them. It's not just. And even if the people there are wicked, even for the wicked people, if there are 50 righteous people there, I'm asking you for mercy for them. Don't destroy the wicked, even though they are wicked, if there are 50 righteous. And he bargains them down to 10. That's an extraordinary plea on behalf of Sodom, which shows the extent to which he wants people to be treated kindly and given a second chance and given support even when they've sunk to a very low level. So this is famous for Abraham. Isaac and Jacob also engaged in similar loving kindnesses towards other people. And that's certainly one part of it that God uses as his basis for dealing with the world. But there's another meaning here. It's a meaning that we spoke about a few days ago when we started this series, where we talked about the word Baruch. I quoted the Gemara that says, Ezu Chassid, who is a person who counts as a Chassid? Chassid comes from the word Chesed. Chesed is loving kindness. Chassid is a practitioner of loving kindness. And it answers, he who, Chasidim Kono, someone who does loving kindness to his Creator. And we asked, since God is infinite and self-contained and has necessary existence and self-sufficient and independent, what does it mean to do kindness to him? And we said, because God projects himself to us with a certain image of creating the world for a purpose, and we are invited to contribute to that purpose. Since that's his purpose, when we do something that pushes forward his purpose, we're doing something good for him. And that also is called a chesed. So when you're talking about the loving kindnesses of the fathers, it's not only that they were interpersonally very kind, but also the way in which they interacted with God was also an expression of loving kindness. So both of them, a record for both of them is something which stands as a foundation on which God decides how to deal with the world. Okay, we're together? Okay. Then it says, brings a redeemer to their children's children for his name's sake with love. Now, you notice that the word redeemer here is capitalized in the translation. Why would they do that? I mean, when we capitalize titles for people, don't we usually do that for God? Surely they don't mean that the person who redeems the Jewish people and the world is going to be God. That's not our religion. Hello, that belongs to a different religion altogether, right? So they probably don't mean that. Why would they capitalize it? So one explanation is they mean to refer to the Messiah. Could it be? It could be. But I don't think it has to be. Because if you take a look on page 239, top of the page, you have a blessing called redemption. See our suffering, fight our battle, and redeem us, speedily for your name's sake. For you are a powerful redeemer. Wow. Here the word redeemer is referring to God. And it's got a capital R. Twice. Blessed are you, Hashem, Redeemer of Israel. But I'm not sure that this is correct either, and I'll tell you why. Because the middle section of the Shemoneh Esrei is the section of petition, and the petitions are divided up. There are 6 petitions which are local in time and space, me and my community, and then there were 6 and are now 7 national petitions. And one of the national petitions is the coming of the Messiah. But that's not this one. This one is in the local petitions. It starts with knowledge, and then help in doing tshuva, and then forgiveness for sin. And then it talks about this redemption, and then health and healing, and then prosperity, All of these are local. After this, you have the seven national blessings of national petition for salvation for the nation. So that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about Jews in trouble, like in Europe today, like in some places in America today. They're in trouble, and they need someone to protect them, to help them. So this doesn't have to be a reference to the Messiah. And I think in the first blessing, it also doesn't have to be a reference to the Messiah. The same word in Hebrew that's used here on 239 is the word that's used on 235. And 239 is certainly not the Messiah. So I would not necessarily, I wouldn't capitalize it. I wouldn't say, it means God sends help, as we have had, first of all, we know about dozens and dozens of times, and then as history gets revealed, we end up knowing things that we didn't know before, where there was a danger that we weren't even aware of, and God saved us. This is something that's going on all the time. So I would see this as much more universal than just referring to the Messiah. And that being the case, I certainly wouldn't capitalize it. So he brings a Redeemer to their children's children. In other words, there's a strong national aspect here. He's doing it because we are part of that nation, not necessarily because we have earned it. And that makes a big difference. That means later on in 239, when we make the petition, we shouldn't have in the back of our minds, yeah, but we don't really deserve it, you know. We're not really living up to it. So certainly God's not going to hear us, not going to listen to our prayer. And that's not true. Because one of the reasons that he brings the Redeemer to the Jewish people at all stages of history is because they are the Jewish people, because they are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That alone can be enough. Just like we spoke about the redemption from Egypt. And we said that he didn't earn anything because they are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he made a covenant with them. Not that they don't have to do anything, they do have to do something, but they don't. It doesn't have to be to earn it or deserve it. Well, let me explain what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a little bit the mysteries here. Let's say that there's an offer for a scholarship, and it's going to be decided by lottery. But you have to fill out an application. Now, so George fills out an application, and he's chosen, he gets a scholarship. Did he earn the scholarship? I mean, it was chosen by lottery, right? It could have been anybody. Nothing about him was taken into account when he was chosen to get the scholarship. But if he doesn't fill out the application, he's not going to get it. So it's not that filling out the application is how he earned it and deserved it. It's just a precondition for which is necessary for you to be able to get it. So there's a very interesting statement by the Gaon of Vilna. The verses in Exodus say that they cried out to God from the oppression of the Egyptians. They did cry out to God, but it was the oppression of the Egyptians that triggered their cry to God. The Gaon of Vilna says this: God made a covenant with the patriarchs, and that covenant includes like a permanent connection to the Jewish people, which will never be broken. These people are Jews, but clearly not all the Jews in that generation were saved. We mentioned that the Midrash says that 80% died there. So even though they were Jews and part of the same people with whom God has a covenant of their patriarchs, they weren't saved. So what's the difference? The difference is, do they represent that covenant? So God caused the oppression of Jewish people so as to put them in an extreme circumstance, so that those who really have a relevance to the covenant of the patriarchs will call out to him. Then God can say, as if to speak to the patriarchs, you see them? Those are your guys. Those are the ones who represent you. Those are the ones who still remember you. Not that when there's oppression and you're crying for help to God, therefore you have earned miraculous salvation and exodus. No, but you have to be relevant to the covenant in order for the covenant to apply to you. So that's what their action accomplished. So that means that this bare condition of relevance can do the job. Doesn't mean that you have to earn it. And I think that's something when we come to the 239 and we talk about praying for a Redeemer with a little r, we have to realize that could be enough. And therefore we shouldn't feel that it's hopeless because we and our generation don't have the merit alone to be saved. Yeah.
Could it be that when Abram was, petitioning for each 50 and 40 and whatever, and then even 10, could it be that it wasn't just necessarily for that time for Sodom, but for future generations?
Wow, I think you're saying something very, very important. Because the question that's asked is, in the end, there weren't 10, and in the end, they were destroyed. So what was the good of the negotiations? So what you just said, I heard from the present Boston Rabbi of Yerushalayim, which is many years ago. There are two midrashim after the sin of the golden calf and after the sin of the spies, where Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm going to wipe them all out, I'm going to make a new nation out of you. And Moshe Rabbeinu pleads on our behalf that he shouldn't do that, and the plea is successful. The Midrash expands on the dialogue, and in both cases, Moses says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if I bring you 10 tzaddikim, 10 righteous people, will you relent and not destroy the nation? And God says yes. And then there's a tricky way to figure out the 10, because really there were only 7. It's a whole long story there. But the question is raised, how did he get on the number 10? Where did number 10 come from? And the answer is it came from Abraham. Abraham put 10 on record. It's a precedent that when there are 10, that will work. Didn't happen to work in that case, but it worked later for those two cases. So what you're saying is gold. It's really it's a beautiful connection, and it's an illustration of a general rule. Nothing in history is lost. Nothing in history is wiped out. Nothing in history is in vain. Even if you want to build a new building where there's an old building, the first thing you do is tear down the old building. Somebody who's watching says, oh, you're breaking up a building. Right? Breaking up a building. That's how I build a new building. So if you don't know that a new building is going to be built, it looks purely destructive. Nothing's purely destructive. Everything contributes in some way or other. So that's a very good insight. Okay, now it says, for his name's sake, with love. As I pointed out yesterday, the whole thing goes back and forth between a description of God as transcendent and a description of God as immanent, a God as above and beyond and in total control of the whole universe, versus being present and focused on the conditions of a very small subset of humanity for a particular period of time. And that's because they're both true. So for his name's sake, now here, it's not totally detached. What is a name? What is a name? I must tell you, I saw a definition of what a name is in I think it was the Pri Tzaddik, and L'Havdil, I saw it in Charles Sanders Peirce, who was the greatest of the American pragmatic philosophers, and the definitions were almost identical. Now, Peirce is in America, and Pri Tzaddik is in Europe, and they certainly neither heard of the other, but they came out with the exact same definition. A name is something whereby a person can bring under consideration a thing. So if I want to talk about the President-elect of the United States, I talk about Donald Trump. When I say the name, that makes the speech about him. So the name is like a link between the speaker and the thing that's being spoken about. So a name, by its very nature, is a relational thing. It's a way in which something relates to those who want to talk about it, and it gives them the ability to focus their speech on that thing. But his namesake is something which is relevant to all mankind. There's such a thing as a chilul Hashem. When the Jewish people fail and are punished, it causes a desecration of God's name in the eyes of the non-Jewish population. So his name is not only relevant to us, it's relevant to the whole of humanity. So when it says that he does it for his name's sake, that in part is for the way in which the whole of humanity will look at him. It's very interesting in Hazinu, it says when the Jewish people fail and they deserve to be severely punished, it says, and according to the strict justice, the non-Jewish world should have the capacity to devastate the Jewish people, but I, the Creator, will not do that because they'll say their power is what enabled them to overpower the Jewish people. I don't want them to say that. So because they might say that, therefore, I'm not going to allow them to do it. Even though the Jewish people deserve such a punishment, I'm not going to allow it because I care that they shouldn't misunderstand me. I care that they shouldn't have a misrepresentation of me. And this, by the way, is part of what Moses says to God when he pleads on behalf of the Jewish people after the golden calf and after the sin of the spies. One of the things he says in both cases is, what are the non-Jews going to say if you do this? They're going to say, you took us out of Egypt because you hate us, so as to destroy us in the wilderness. They're not going to know that in 200 years there's going to be a new population coming from me. They're not going to know that. They're just going to see the destruction, and that's the impression they're going to get from it. And in the case of the spies, although Moses makes 3 arguments against destroying the Jewish people, God says, Salachti kidvarecha, which in Hebrew is singular, not plural. There's no yud in the word. I've forgiven according to your word singular. And since he made 3 arguments, and he says, I'm forgiving according to your word singular, it'd be nice to know which one it is. And the oral tradition tells us it's the one where it says, what will the non-Jews say? That's a very powerful argument, which shows that, so to speak, God is invested in what the non-Jews will say. He cares about that. So this, for his name's sake, isn't localized with respect to us. That's why I say it's more general. And with love, the love is definitely for us. By the way, maybe 20 years ago, I was coming back from London on an El Al flight, which leaves at 2:30 in the afternoon. And the then chief rabbi of Israel was on the flight. And was customary, we made a minyan in Heathrow Airport to daven mincha. And there was an English boy there, an English fellow who's in Yeshiva in Eretz Israel, also on the flight. He came over to me and he said, I want you to know that that's a chilul Hashem. It's a desecration of God's name. I said, really? Why? He said, because English people don't like it when you take over their public spaces for your religious rituals. They don't like that. So I said, that's interesting. Then I decided, when I got home, to look it up. Is that really a chilul Hashem? Desecration of God's name because a Jew is doing a mitzvah, and the Goyim don't like it when the Jew does the mitzvah. Is that called the desecration of God's name? They definitely don't like it. They definitely will think badly of Jews for doing it, but is the non-Jew thinking badly of the Jew under those conditions called a desecration of his name? And if you look at the Mesilas Yesharim by Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, you'll see that it's not true. Because he says that the concern with the non-Jewish reaction to what we do is only relevant when it's not a mitzvah. If it's a mitzvah that you are required to do, then you do it, and if they don't like you, that's not desecration of God's name. Only if it's a voluntary mitzvah or it's a custom, then if you're going to cause a bad impression, you shouldn't do it. So since davening mincha with the minyan is something that's necessary to do, And you may say, well, why didn't you daven on the plane? That happens to be very controversial. My Rebbe, Zechron Livracha, and Rav Wolbe, Zechron Livracha, and Dovid, Yeshivat Ohr Somayach, all held that you should not daven in the plane, in the aisles. You should not make a minyan. You should daven in your seat. So, according to them, it's not an option. I don't know what the chief rabbi held at that time, but since that's not an option, and it is a mitzvah to daven in the minyan, davening in the airport was doing a mitzvah. So that fellow from London, England, was wrong. It's not considered a desecration of God's name. Anyway, here's something where God says, as long as the Jewish people are in exile, my name is being desecrated. These are God's people, and they're being victimized, and God doesn't save them, so maybe God doesn't care about them, or God doesn't have the power to save them. All of this is what is going on when we are in exile, and therefore, that's one of the reasons why God is going to perform the redemption. Okay, we're on page 235 of the Siddur. We're going word by word through the text of the silent prayer, the Shemoneh Esrei. Now it says, O King, helper, savior, and shield. Helper, savior, and shield. What's the difference between a helper and a savior and a shield? And could you explain the order, at least what the order is, if not be able to explain why we are using it in that order? Yeah.
You can help someone if their life isn't in danger. Then you can save someone if their life is in danger. And then finally you can shield them from ever being in danger in the first place.
Okay, I think that's almost all of it. You can help people whether or not their life is in danger. Savior does sound like your life is in danger, although you could be saved from an accident, you could be saved from a loss, so maybe that's not perfectly. But think of the participation of the person in the event.
Why did we skip O King?
I'll come back to it, but I just want to get these three qualities. Right? Helper means I'm doing it. I'm doing it. Not just being applied to, but I'm not doing it alone. Helper means there's a kind of partnership going on. Savior means I'm drowning. You know, the Titanic has sunk and I'm in the water. I can't do anything. So I'm being saved. And as you said, shield means I never get into trouble. So it's a progression of how much he's doing for me. In the first case, he is participating together with me in my efforts. The second case, he let me get into danger. He's running the world. If I'm in danger, it's because he allowed that to happen or made it happen. But he then extracts me from the danger. And shield is even more exquisite, that I don't get into the danger altogether. Now, the truth is that Hashem is doing all three at the same time, and often enough, he's doing all three at the same time with the same person in different respects of his life. If you think of the gigantic advantage you have in where you started in life vis-a-vis the rest of the human population, you could write shield with all capital letters in 20-point font, in brilliant red. You're not worried where your next meal is coming from. You're not suffering from various diseases. You're not living in a war zone. You have an education. Your native language is English. Half of the world's publications are in English. And 3/4 of the scientific publications are in English. You have a gigantic head start over the rest of the populations of the world. That's why English is spoken everywhere, because you got to speak English to get ahead. As once French was the international language and once Spanish was the international language, today it's English. So you have a gigantic head start. That's all shield. Things that just you don't worry about because they're not a concern for you. Salvation, especially with respect to certain types of challenges and certain types of losses, losing a friend because I did something and he did something, and was I wrong? Probably some of it, and he was wrong, and now friendship is precious. And I don't know what to do. I've tried, but my strategies aren't working. And I guess there's no help for it. I'm just going to have to reconcile myself to the fact that I've lost a friendship. And then the person calls up unexpectedly and says, you know what? I've thought it over. Let's start over. I say, wow, look at that. I didn't do it. I didn't cause it. I didn't make it happen. And then you say thank you because you realize it came from there. And then there are things where Hakadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm not saving you. If you are invested and you're taking responsibility, then I'll be there to supplement your actions, and I will make them successful. But it's not something which I'll do for you unless you are participating. That's helper. Now, having said all of that, which do you think is the most prominent of the three, the most important of the three, the most valuable of the three? Helper, because we weren't created to drown and be saved. We weren't created to be protected from dangers. That's not why we were created. We're created to do something. We're created to accomplish something. That's the purpose of the creation. So here it starts with the most prominent one, most important one. That's when you're fulfilling the purpose of your creation, when he's helping you do what needs to be done, and you're doing your part in it. The other two are there because they may be necessary for you to continue to function altogether. But that's not the emphasis. The emphasis is on helper. I say that because people think in terms of the amount that God is investing, and they think of it as a crescendo, because in the case of Shield, he's investing the maximum. But that's not what we're here for, to get that maximum investment. Okay. Now, king is a very complex subject. Let me just take a step back. Hebrew vocabulary is very small. I don't mean telephone and encyclopedia, which they borrow from other words, other languages. The native vocabulary of Hebrew is very small. And in English, it has the biggest vocabulary of any contemporary language. And that's why, for any word in Hebrew, you can have 15 words in English which express various nuances of the concept, which in Hebrew you can't express unless you write a whole paragraph. We don't have words for them. When you have a single subject in Hebrew that has a number of different words with different nuances, that means that for the Hebrew language and for the Jewish civilization, these are very important concepts. One of them is intellectual understanding. There are at least 5 different words that refer to different aspects of intellectual understanding, and maybe more in the Hebrew language. Here, authority, power, control, rulership has a number of different words. One of them is Adon. Adon means something like master. Another one is Moshel, which means ruler, usually ruler by force. In ancient Hebrew, in the Tanakh, you have Dabar, who was like the autocrat. And then you have Melech. Melech, which is translated as king. Not every authority agrees with what I'm going to tell you, but it is a main theme in Jewish thought. The concept of Melech is a Melech below Am. There's no king without a nation. And that doesn't mean what every 6-year-old knows, you can't be king by alone because then you're not king over a nation. No, what it means is this: the nation has to accept him. They have to accept him. If they don't accept him, he's not a king. Or he may have an army, like Putin, and be able to control the population. That makes him a moshel, a ruler. That may make him an adon, a master. Doesn't make him a king. King means the people accept him. Rosh Hashanah, the day of judgment, the beginning of the year, in our literature is called the coronation day. One of the things that happens on Rosh Hashanah is that we crown God, King of the universe. What does it mean that we crown him? It means by our accepting him and committing ourselves to him, we make him king. Ramchal says in the Derech Hashem that the very fact that God chose the title king for himself is in a certain sense an absolute disgrace. It's a disgrace because the creator of everything, who's constantly creating everything, and everything's existence depends upon him, that he should have a title that depends upon his creations, is almost inconceivable. How could a creature whose existence is being given by God present to God something which God needs from him? How could God need us? But by choosing the title king, he put himself in that position, where he has the title king only if we give it to him. So, indeed, Rav Moshe Shapiro, Zichrono Livracha, was in the last period one of the greatest contemporary Jewish philosophers. He writes in one of his books that by choosing the title king, he's committed to the eternity of the Jewish people, because we are the only people who consistently crown him king. He won't be king if there aren't any Jews, because there won't be anybody to crown him king. So this relationship of king is a mutual relationship, just like I told you at the first word of Baruch, which is a relationship of mutual blessing, that we bless him and he blesses us. And our blessing to him is to enable him to bless us in the way that he wants to bless us. So king is a mutual relationship. Being king, he has the authority to issue his will and to run our affairs, but he gets that authority through the fact that we accept him. So this now is the introduction to the three ways in which he interacts with us. We have to know what's the dynamic of the interaction. It's this interacting dynamic. Okay? That's okay. And then we say, this is the last thing to analyze for this blessing. Blessed are you, Hashem, shield of Abraham. Aha. Now let's see. The Art Scroll correctly titles this blessing Patriarchs. And it mentions Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So you should ask, why does it end only with Abraham? Why doesn't it end with all three? Shield of Abraham is a quote from the Torah. There are such phrases also for Isaac and Jacob as well. They could easily have extended it. The simple answer has to be, mentioning Abraham already does the job. Mentioning Abraham includes Isaac and Jacob also. Yes?
Why does it say shield of Abraham? Isn't that the lowest level? I would think Abraham would be helper of Abraham.
Isn't that a point where he was able to take refuge in Hashem?
I think that helper would apply to all of them. But Abraham, of the three, was the only one who was under an attempt at murder. Nimrod wanted to kill him, and he was saved miraculously from a threat to his life. He also lived at a time when he had a whole population against him. So he was in presence of danger in a way that the other two were not.
Yaakov and Esau? Esau wanted to kill him?
Maybe, but he didn't take any action. And when he came to take action, he was subverted. He was stopped by it. So it didn't turn out that he was able to do anything. Nimrod threw Abraham into a furnace. He actually went that far. So I think that's an easy way to point out that that's why it's not the only thing that's said about Abraham, but that's what's said about what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for Abraham. Why it doesn't say the other things as well, I don't know exactly, but it's a quote from the Torah itself. So we said that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are embodiments of those three fundamental ways in which God interacts with the world: loving kindness, strict justice, and the combination between the two of them. What we didn't say is that after all, Abraham gave birth to Isaac, didn't he? And Isaac gave birth to Jacob. So Abraham is the father and grandfather of the other two. Let's see if we can work out how that would apply to those characteristics, to those principles of action: loving kindness, strict justice, and accommodation. On the surface, loving kindness and strict justice are contradictory. Let's imagine you see A giving B $500. And you ask A, why did you do that? Now here are two answers he could give. One is, he's my employee. We signed a contract. If he works for a week, 40 hours, I give him $500. So I owe him. He worked the week, and I'm paying him his wages. That's one answer. The other answer is, I happen to know B, I like him, and it's his birthday. So I gave him $500. The first is strict justice. He owes him $500. If he doesn't pay, then he's victimizing him. He's a criminal. In the second, he's freely giving him a gift because he wants to benefit him. The first is strict justice. The second is loving kindness. You can't do both. When A gives B money, either B earned it or he didn't earn it. If he earned it, it's going to be justice. If he didn't earn it, it's going to be a gift. Can it be that he both earned it and didn't earn it? So it can't be both of them at the same time. At least in a single interaction, loving kindness and justice are absolute contradictories. But there's a more subtle way in which justice can be a product of loving kindness. We have laws of charity, I'm sure you know. Maimonides distinguishes 8 levels of charity. The next to best is anonymous charity, where the giver and receiver don't know each other. Why is that? Well, charity carries with it an implication. The recipient isn't making it. He's not providing for himself. He's not what we call successful. That's a bitter implication. And if the donor and the recipient know each other, every time they meet, the recipient is going to cringe. Yeah, I know it. I'm not making it. Better they shouldn't know each other. And indeed, if they do know each other, the Jewish law says if they're walking down the street and the donor sees the recipient approaching him, the donor should cross the street so they don't meet, so that he shouldn't cause any embarrassment in the recipient. Interesting law, Jewish law. Okay, that's the next to best. What's the best? The best is to give the person who needs money a job or teach him a trade. Let's say we give him a job. Oh, you know people who are out of work? That's very bad. And many of them are in terrible pain. And they go to great lengths to try to find a job. Give him a job. So you're giving him something that he needs, right? But here, notice the donor and recipient do know each other. So why would this be a higher form of charity? The answer is that when the recipient gets his check at the end of the week, it's not a gift. He earned it. So he's not embarrassed. Here he gets the money without embarrassment because he earned it. He deserves it. That's the highest level of charity. Now let's ask. You hire somebody to do a job. You sign a contract, and it comes the end of the week. He worked his hours, and you pay him his wages. What kind of relationship is that? What kind of interaction is that? That's a justice interaction. You owe him the money. You'd better pay it. So it's a justice interaction. But setting up a justice relationship can be the highest form of loving kindness. Because then you're giving the most complete gift. Because the gift, when it's received, doesn't have any detracting factor of embarrassment and implication of failure. This is how justice can be a product of loving kindness. So, the picture we have is this. Imagine loving kindness that just gives. That's certainly loving kindness. But if that's all you do, then you compromise the effects of loving kindness. When you will be parents, you will see this directly and you will struggle to do the right thing. especially when the child wants another piece of candy and you know it's not good for him, and he starts banging his head on the floor or holding his breath until he passes out, which they do. And it's designed to break your heart so that you can't say no. And you have to struggle and think, yeah, but if I keep saying yes, it's going to hurt him more. And you have to be able to say no. Because your loving kindness requires you to say no to him. So if Abraham is pure loving kindness, which in a certain sense he was, it can go too far. It can fail to be as effective as it needs to be. And therefore, strict justice is a necessary companion to loving kindness. That's how Abraham gives birth to Isaac. That's how loving kindness gives birth to strict justice as a way of implementing a more far-seeing type of loving kindness. But loving kindness left to itself wouldn't do that. Loving kindness is just giving. And here sometimes you have to withhold or only give conditionally. Yes, if you work, then I'll pay your wages. And if not, I'm not going to pay you. So this is why, if you mention Abraham and understand in depth who Abraham is, then you see that Isaac is a necessary outcome of Abraham's existence. Now, when you have the two of them as separate factors, so then you could understand sometimes you'll use loving kindness, sometimes you'll use strict justice. You could vary according to circumstances. But sometimes what's necessary is something more subtle than that. We said this the other day, and that's where the loving kindness clothes itself in the justice, where the immediate motivation for the justice is the loving kindness itself. It's not the question about the long-term outcome. We gave the example of the child who's running across the street, and you don't call him over and reason with him. You grab his jacket and pull him out of the street and yell at him. Don't do that, because you don't want him to consider what you say and see if he agrees, and then see if he wants to follow your direction or go his own independent way. No, you want him to be alive and not dead. So you want to impress upon him that this has to be done. So you treat him with very great strictness, and probably the child at that moment doesn't feel your love, doesn't feel it. When he's 15, or if he's precocious, 11, he'll realize that you did it out of love for him, but it has to be done. The love there is clothed in the act of strictness, and you have to hide the love. Here you have to hide the love, because if it's done with love and understanding and sympathy and support, he won't take it seriously enough to stay out of the street. So that's where you combine the two. One is the motivation, and the other as the overt behavior. And that's Jacob. So when you mention Abraham, if you understand the principle that he stands for and you understand how it develops, by saying Abraham, you said all three. And that's why it's satisfactory to say Shield of Abraham and not mention the other two. Okay? Okay. The next blessing starts with, you are eternally mighty. My Lord, revivifier of the dead. Oh, that's a nice word. Never heard that one before. Okay. So first of all, we talked about might, strength. And we said that strength is the ability to overcome resistance. And it's not easy to imagine, vis-a-vis the Creator, what kind of resistance there could be for which we are required to note that He's strong enough to overcome it. Don't worry, He's not going to be swamped by it. He can handle it. What's it going to be? A galaxy? You know, the whole of space-time? Come on. He's creating those things. There's no competition there. And the answer that we gave is, we don't talk about God, the Creator, what He is. What He is something that's utterly beyond us, something we cannot conceive of in any way. All we can talk about is what He does. And if that sounds like an intellectual failure, it sounds like all these religious people just don't know what they're talking about, and therefore they're not intellectually competent. I would introduce you to quantum mechanics and ask them, what is light exactly? What is it? Up to this moment, no one has a clue. All we know is what it does. We can predict the outcome of the two-slit experiment with probability, but why that happens, how it happens, what the nature of light is that makes it happen, not a clue. Not a clue. It's what goes under the name of the measurement problem in some circumstances, which is unsolved. That's not intellectual failure. That's where we are. We see what it does, and we can predict how it'll behave, but we don't know what it is. That's life. Sometimes we don't know something like that. So saying that about God isn't an intellectual dodge, and it doesn't show the intellectual incompetence of religion and so forth and so on. It's something which sometimes you have to admit that that's your circumstance. So here we talk about the ways in which God interacts with the universe, and there are a number of them, and as principles they can come in conflict with one another. And when they come in conflict, like loving kindness and strict justice, as I mentioned before, there are also principles of God's interaction with the world. And when they come in conflict with one another, there has to be an outcome, so one has to be able to overcome the other. And that's called strength, because they're both divine attributes. The resistance of one divine attribute to another divine attribute is real resistance. That's real resistance. That's a real competition. And then when you talk about strength, you're talking about the ability of one to overcome the other. Sometimes which one is different, and there are combinations where they work as allies. It's a very complicated situation. But the idea of strength always it applies to a multiplicity. Strength means A overcomes B. That's exactly the way we define it for people as well. The word gibor in Hebrew, the rabbinic tradition defines it as overcoming your own spirit. Overcoming your own spirit. That means there's something in you which overcomes the spirit in you. It's not something overcoming itself. That's the problem. That's not sensible. You got to split it into two if there's an overcoming. And by the way, there are a number of theories in psychology which picture the human being as a committee. Probably the most famous is Freud, the ego, the superego, and the id, transactional analysis. There are others. Why do they do that? Well, because there are features of the human being which can't be explained if there aren't different elements in him operating. Think of self-deception. To deceive means, I know the truth, but I'm going to make you believe a lie. That's what it means to deceive you, right? Now, can you deceive yourself? Well, if you know the truth, then you know the truth. Then you're not going to believe the lie. So you can't deceive yourself. There's part of you that's deceiving the other part of you. So you have to be a committee, right? So the human being, that's why Gibor, mighty, refers to one aspect of a person in competition with another aspect of a person. And we're taking that structure, we're applying it to the Creator, not because the Creator isn't one. He is one, but I can't deal with his oneness. I can't conceptualize his oneness. So I have this picture of various features of the way in which he interacts with the world, and the agent behind that, I can't imagine. Maybe I'll give you an example of what it means not to imagine something like this. Imagine you have a good synthesizer. There are problems with synthesizers. They've gone back now to using recordings of the human voice because they can't synthesize, and the violin also. But let's say they were a really good synthesizer. He went back 200 years with this keyboard, and you're playing music for people, and they hear a violin, and they hear a trumpet, and they hear timpani, and you're just sitting there with those things in front of you, and they hear all these different sounds. How could that be? How did you sneak a little violin into the box? Tell me, where's the door of the box? How small is the violinist? Tell me, how could you do that? It's not possible. People aren't that small. And you say to him, there's nobody in there. And he says, listen, I know what a violin is. I know what it sounds like. I know how you make that sound. I just don't know how you got him in the box. Sorry. It's not like that. You see, it's being done in a way that you can't even imagine. All those instrumental sounds are produced by this one box. He doesn't know about closed circuits. He doesn't know about transistors and so on and so on, chips. Given his intellectual level and information base, you can't even explain it to him. The sounds are all coming out of there, but in a way that he can't even imagine. Something like that is going on vis-a-vis the Creator, that these interactions are what he brings into existence in the world. How can there be one agent behind all of these interactions? That's where our minds don't apply. Our minds don't fit. This, by the way, is both the Kabbalistic tradition and in the philosophical tradition. Maimonides writes about this in part 1, chapter 54 of the Guide at great length. So when we talk about Gibor, we have to understand that we're appealing to that picture of the multiplicity of interactions and talking about the ability of one to displace the other on various occasions. Okay? Questions? See you tomorrow. Session.